back to the Underbelly Edition. So for our next speaker, I'm actually going to come up here.
This is a bit of a tough follow-up. Great, thanks. So my name's Alexia and I work for the National Drug Research Institute, and we're doing research into online drug markets, and obviously Bitcoin is associated with that. And the reason that I'm here tonight is to just share a case study of Bitcoin in early social adoption. When I've been at the meetups, one of the things that I hear is that the trick is to bring Bitcoin into the marketplace, to have people actually take it on, and to do that outside of the values of the community itself. And so what I thought I would do is just to share with you some attitudes, perceptions and experiences of use. Obviously this is the case study of Silk Road, and the big incentive, the social incentive, was drugs. So that's always a surefire way to get a crowd. So what I'll talk about tonight is just a little bit about what the research itself is about. Then share with you some of the case studies of people's experiences of using Bitcoin. And part of the reason of this talk is a member check. So as a sociologist and using qualitative methodology, I actually need to share my research with people who understand it, because I don't necessarily understand everything I'm reading. So I welcome you to correct me if I'm not understanding what someone's saying, or if I'm not reporting things, so if it's not accurate. This is part of me sharing with you, so that I can get my language and understanding of what I'm reading on the money, so to speak, or on the Bitcoin. Just to let you know, so the book too. This research is currently in process. So if there's any media here and you're interested in this story, please let me know. But there's currently an embargo on it because we actually haven't finished the study. So we're in process, and these are not necessarily findings as such, but they're what I'm learning right now. Okay, so I don't really feel like I need to go into any kind of background as to what Silk Road is, but I'll just check with you. Who's familiar with Silk Road? Okay. All right, well that's done and dusted then. Sorry? Yeah, and obviously I'm not saying that you're all Silk Road users by presenting this to you. For me to be able to get to a group of people who understands what I'm working with, what the environment is, this is about the closest match I can get. So I'm not saying anything here, but I do welcome any kind of comment. So I guess the main thing about this slide is just really talking about the growth of the market space. So this is how you get a real sense of why Bitcoin, and how it sort of was a part of this space, and how it grew through this space, I guess, in terms of social awareness and adoption. So just in this one, you get to see, like at the beginning of Silk Road, about June 2011, they were listing about 485 different there was 485 different listings of drugs for sale. And, as you get to a year later from that, that's about approximately, pardon my maths, about 3 times the volume. And then once you get into just as at the time that Silk Road, the first version was seized, it's 13,000. So that's an astronomical growth in terms of consumption and social awareness and adoption of these spaces. And of course, Silk Road was in a marketplace of about two or three other drug markets at the time, and this is riding on the back of obviously other ways of purchasing drugs that have been around since the inception of the internet. I believe in one book that I read, so one of the first transactions over was someone sourcing pot So it's been integral at the very core of the internet, just like porn and gambling. These are the industries that engage people, and obviously they're the industries that are heavily regulated. So people look for other ways to do them, they don't stop. So in this case, the key aspects, and I'm just going to say this, but I believe you all know this, about the darknet drug markets, is that they are affiliated with alternative digital currencies, because people obviously are trying to cut the connection between their fiat, money, and what they're doing in these spaces. And the anonymity of buyers and sellers, so that goes into that sense of anonymous sellers, and there's quite a people create identities, and it doesn't mean that you have to know who they are, but you have to know how they act. And so people create a sense of a fixed persona online that becomes a predictable character. So then, just to give you a sense of scale, at the time that, just before DPR went down, he gave an interview and basically just said we've won the state's war on drugs because of Bitcoin. So obviously the relationship between Bitcoin may not have been a sanctioned one, but it's definitely a high profile one with this space. And at the time of seizure, Silk Road had about 95 million Bitcoins, and that was valued at that time of approximately 1.2 billion US dollars. And so that was at a time, and I'd love to be corrected on this when there was about 11.75 million Bitcoins in circulation. So the Bitcoin market was mostly sucked up by Silk Road at that time. That's what these figures tell me. So if it's different to that, then...
No, I think you're wrong by a couple of orders of magnitude.
Sorry?
I think you're wrong by a couple of orders of magnitude.
Fantastic, I'll get that information from you. So this data, where this is coming from, is the Digital Citizens Alliance report on Silk Road. So if that's incorrect, then I need to actually correct it.
It's correct, but sales revenue of Bitcoins doesn't mean that's how much that got seized. So most of the Bitcoins were circulating outside of Silk Road, but only 9.5 million was what was gone through there throughout a period of a year or something.
Ah, okay.
Anyways, we'll talk.
Yeah, definitely. So this is one of the main reasons that I'm sharing this kind of stuff, because I don't have that level of understanding, and I'm bringing it to make sure that the research I'm doing is not shit, basically. By just not pretending that I know what I'm doing. I know qualitative methods and people. So this is another part of that same report, which just talks about the relationship between Silk Road and Bitcoin. At the beginning, it's sort of October. Yeah. Sorry.
Just got to put the batteries back in. You're good to go.
Yeah. Just thank you.
You can just keep on going.
Okay, sweet. So in November, just after Bitcoin, so at the time, a lot of the commentary was, as Silk Road goes down, that's obviously going to affect Bitcoin, and I believe that you're all fairly familiar with how people continue to predict the decline or rise of Bitcoin according to different elements that happen, because people like to do that. And so obviously at the time, Bitcoin went up, so it was about $1,000 US per Bitcoin, and I'm just going to put it there so I don't drop it in. And so after Silk Road went down, it went up to one of its highest values. So obviously the relationship is not particularly tied, but the drug markets were one incentive for the early social adoption of Bitcoin. And that's really my main argument here. And so, yeah, so by that now, Bitcoin is obviously half of that for factors not related to that I wouldn't believe. So, yeah, that graph is really just to talk about the relationship between the drug markets and Bitcoin, and just to sort of show how it's not really that affiliated now. But obviously it's still fundamentally tied because it is the case study for the adoption of Bitcoin, and that's how people are using it. Okay, so what I'm doing. The study that I'm doing for the National Drug Research Institute is to look at harm reduction. So we look at different markets, how drugs are being retailed and where they're being bought from, and what the consumption patterns are like that happen in response to that. So obviously unregulated drug markets, which increase the range and variety of choice of what people can get, also the ease with how they get access to it, has impacts upon both people's benefits and their harms. And so being able to understand and predict those patterns is part of the research process. In particular, I'm also looking at shifts from the social experience of purchasing in place, and then looking at how that transfers into the digital environment. So my particular interest is digital community, and how what we do online affects our worlds. So that's the focus. And the study that I'm doing is a qualitative study. So this is based on interviews. I do encrypted anonymous interviews that go for about 2 hours. And I talk to participants about their drug use, about their experiences of purchasing through Silk Road, and also its relationship in their life, how they've what that's done for them. So we're sort of looking at that pattern of access and consumption, and just finding out what the actual nuances of social experience are. So in that context, I also talk to participants about their tech skills. Is this like something that only people with highly refined tech skills will have access to, or is this something that has much broader social access if people have incentive? So the question is Tor, for example, encryption, the use of Bitcoin, is this a barrier, or is this just, a bump in the road to what you want? So those are the sorts of questions that I've come up with. And so what I just thought I would share with you are just a few different perspectives that people have given me in those interviews. So just in terms of access and Bitcoin, for people who are not necessarily passionate, for example, about the technology itself, they do find it a bit of a hassle. And obviously at the beginning of Silk Road in about 2011, there wasn't an established set of places that people could easily go to purchase Bitcoin. And so there's some narratives that I have about people talking about the different websites, how they found Bitcoin, who shared it with them, how they learned how to use it. And in this case, Tor is super easy to use. Mostly you just download a program, follow the links, but I actually found it quite difficult to manage to use Bitcoins, given how few websites offer services for the country where I'm from. However, nowadays I have a website that I use for BTC that's super easy to use. So there was an initial hurdle. And the person says that mainly the only thing that slowed me down is using Silk Road was getting Bitcoin. So initially, people's capacity to get access to Bitcoin was the hurdle, rather than any of these other layers. So that was initial kind of impression that people gave me, but obviously as time has progressed and the industry around Bitcoin has proliferated, that ease of access it's much less of a hassle. So Bitcoin and anonymity. Clearly with Bitcoin it's not an anonymous currency, and but there are practices. So when I'm doing the interview, I do time checks as I go through the interview, and I'm like, because I have no idea how this person is situated, what's going down for them. So every now and then in the text I just check in and say, how you going? We've got about 15 minutes to go, and someone will say, oh yeah, I'm just tumbling my Bitcoins, you've got 15 minutes. So, in terms of the ethnography, just the experience of actually doing the interviews, I can see people practicing the use of Bitcoin. So it's quite fascinating to see those patterns and behaviours as I do the interview. So with Bitcoin and anonymity, my first quote, so finding Silk Road was one thing, ordering a whole other. Buying Bitcoin, figuring out PGP. Of course, you can do all of those things quickly and easily, but I was all about keeping myself secure. So obviously, anonymity and security are big concerns for people in this environment, and they do the research, they put the time in, and try to find ways through that can facilitate their experience. So people are persistent if there's a goal in mind. The next quote on from that. As for buying Bitcoin, I never had an issue with it. I was familiar with the currency, but I never had a use for it. So when it came to buy, I felt like some sort of secret agent. Fake names and wire transfers, it was all very exhilarating. So that's one other element to Bitcoin, is that, and particularly this environment, is that people feel like secret agents. And going through the technology, so the experience isn't necessarily, it's novel, and that is part of the whole experience of why people do this. So just purchasing Bitcoin and volatility, so you obviously have full knowledge of the volatility of the market, and this is for people who are actually situating themselves in the volatility of the market and the volatility of drug access. There's a massive amount of anxiety that goes in this, and so Bitcoin is part of that ramping up of anxiety that might also give people a novelty boost. So for example, this one participant says, don't talk to me about the Bitcoin economy and selling and buying at the wrong times. That is anxiety inducing, if anything. If I'd waited 2 days, I would have bought 10 times more. And then I would say, well, how do you watch the Bitcoin values? And do you monitor it, or what do you do? And so she says, well, when I'm about to make a purchase, I don't really care about the value, but I try to keep an eye on the local market just to get some idea of where it's at. So obviously people just do it as a point in time transaction, and that volatility is not necessarily a barrier, as I'm sure you're all aware. So that's just interesting to kind of get that situated. Scams and loss. So Bitcoin is used for everything, including threat, scams, and obviously as the drug markets go up and down, people lose a lot of money, a lot of Bitcoin on them. So this is just a bit of an example of that experience. So I was devastated at the close of Silk Road. This person was quite a passionate user as well as a member of that community, and so he was devastated. He was devastated on a couple of levels. I decided to save some money and stock up on buying an ounce from the US for about 22,000. No, 2,200 or so, and I was going to get about half a G domestic so I put $2,600 in my wallet the day the music died. So a lot of Bitcoin does go underground in this kind of context. And then another one that just gives you that sense of loss. The community gets shaken around a lot. If it wasn't the admins of a site scamming us and stealing thousands of Bitcoin, it's someone hacking into a site and demanding money. The hot topic right now is that someone hacked into Agora Marketplace and is demanding 50 Bitcoin, or they say they'll take the addresses and names of thousands of users to the FBI. So Bitcoin is being used just as any form of money, as something that in this environment has obviously a lot of power. So it's a fascinating part to see it being embedded into human social interactions, both positive and negative. And of course the positive side of Bitcoin for many participants is that it does reflect their values, and this environment in particular is based on those kinds of self-autonomy, do no harm, values that are very similar to the values that founded Bitcoin and its early uptake. So In this kind of context, you've got people who are driven to use Bitcoin because they obviously want to access drugs, but also people who are fascinated in the environment and what this means in practice. And so the libertarian perspective, I had one participant give me a long rant, in the most positive manner, of course, about what they viewed was libertarian values in this space. And they saw Bitcoin as very relevant, and that it was fundamentally libertarian and inextricable from Silk Road. So obviously there's a switching. In my understanding, what this means is that there's a shared value space. Bitcoin is culturally constructed in the same way as what actually generated Silk Road itself. So that relationship is very fascinating for me, and that's obviously when I'm here listening to the different ways that people view Bitcoin, I learn a lot from that. So just back one more. So one person was just telling me how much they love Bitcoin and for the different reasons, and so I asked them what those were, and for them it meant, and I think this is dated, I think things have changed now, but it meant no taxes, and no taxes means a serious blow to federal funding, and which means a weakening of authority, which makes me happy. Also, it gives people control over their own money, which is good. So clearly there is an anti-establishment kind of perspective in the use of Bitcoin, and also that it's very much about the centering of the power of the self. So I find those two narratives interesting. So at this point in time, I've got about a month left where I'm doing interviews, and we're aiming for about 20, and I've got about 50. I haven't got about 50. I have 15 interviews, and so I'm looking for 5 more participants. And you're welcome to just put the word out in appropriate places. It's all anonymous, and I don't know who I'm talking to. And with the data protocol that I have, there's no possible way of it being traced back to whoever I talk to. So that's what we do. It's off the record, and we have that anonymised kind of text that we use as our data. So if you'd like to find out any more, these are the website details. But I also did a QR code because I see everyone here uses QR codes. And I was like, oh, maybe I can do that for the research. And so what I'd be really interested in is any of your reactions to this QR code. So you're welcome to take a photograph of it and just do the scan and just let me know what you actually think about it. It's just my website and an email contact. For example, I had a lot more data on there, and the QR code was much denser, and someone said to me, that just looks like a security risk. So I was just like, well, my perception of giving information is different from how people receive it. So if you can test it for me and give me any feedback, I'd be very appreciative of that. So that's my presentation. And I'd just like to acknowledge the people who have participated in this research. I appreciate the risks that they've gone to in talking to me. And we're very grateful to them. It just gives us a socially connected understanding of these spaces. And we're grateful to the moderators of Silk Road subreddit, as well as the Darknet Market subreddit, and also the Hub Forum, who've created spaces where I can actually communicate with the public about this research. And we have a few professors behind me. It's not just me on my own doing my thing. I'm on the Wild West, but not entirely on my own. So that's an acknowledgement of Professor Matt Allen, who was part of seeding this project, as well as Dr. Monica Barrett. It's really her brain baby, but she's actually having a baby, so it's me. And the research is internally funded by ENDRI, and what that means is that we can actually communicate and choose and time what our findings are without having that kind of control that happens when it's publicly funded money.
Thank you. So, I'm sure there are a few willing participants in this crowd. Don't put your hands up. Yeah, you know what to do. Anyway, thanks to both our guest speakers and Possible.com. Money to chickens and eggs tonight. Thanks, guys. Pizza here on the side. See you guys next month.
These guys want to try out today.